Well, guys, it finally happened. We finally have a legal definition, a legal recognition for American single malt whiskey in this country. Now we're going to talk about it. Roll that intro. Welcome back, guys. Something really big in the whiskey world finally happened, long overdue. I know the petitions have been rolling in for like the last 7 or 8 years. And American Single Malt Whiskey finally has its own legal TTB defined classification, I guess is the way to put it. They issued a decision sometime last week. They released their entire I don't know if you call it a thesis or whatever. They released the literature. It's 39 pages. This past, I think, Tuesday or Wednesday. So about a week ago, that was released on December 18th or 19th, and it will be going into effect legally on January 19th of 2025. So really only a month-long ramp-up period for distillers to kind of get on board with everything. But I think it's kind of been a long time coming. For years, the American single malt community has been not struggling, but striving to find an identity in today's whiskey scene. Obviously, anybody who has their finger on the pulse of the whiskey scene, you know, you guys have heard the rumors. There's oak shortages or barrel shortages or cooperages are shut down. Basically, you know, there's been like this log jam since COVID happened, and what was there to kind of pick up that lost ground was the American single malt and the distillers that have been putting it out for years. This is something that's been unofficially put on, being produced for like the last, I don't know, however many years, 10, 12 years. And nobody stopped it because legally there's nothing wrong with doing it, because legally there was no hard definition of what it was. Something like this here. This is the High West High Country. This is an American single malt. It's been on the market for years now. But nobody really knew what an American single malt was. There were some roughed out parameters or what people would approximate. You know, you've always had those people that are like, oh, it's basically just Scotch, but distilled in America. No, that ain't it. Or, oh, it's basically just, you know, American whiskey. They can put whatever they want in it because there's no definition. While that's true, they could have. In most cases, that's not what was going on. But either way, you had some companies putting out some really, really good products. And we're not just talking about craft distillers, like one of my favorites, which is American Fifth out of Lansing. This one specifically, this is their honey malt whiskey. So this is made from, I believe, 100% honey malted barley. It's 90 proof, aged for 18 months in oak containers, and then bottled and sold out of their distillery. And this is legally a American single malt. And for my part, I think American Fifth does a really, really superb job with all of the American single malts they've been putting out, or simply just their malt whiskeys that they've been producing over the last few years. Obviously, you guys can see that I have quite a few of them and I enjoy them. But it's not just the little guys like that. Jack Daniel's has had a American single malt on the market for at least a couple of years now. This is a sherry finished American single malt. I mean, Jack Daniel's, it doesn't get any bigger than that in the distilled spirits world. It really doesn't. But then you have newer people to the party, like Virginia Distilling Company, that took their American single malt and finished it in a Bourbon County stout cask. And this is actually a bottled in bond American single malt. And that's kind of how you knew that the winds of change were starting to shift a little bit, because if you're not heading that direction, I really don't think the government was going to allow you to take an American single malt whiskey and bottle it under government bondage. I think this was released not long ago, maybe a couple months ago, but not too far off of when the TTB actually, you know, finalized their ruling and sat down and said, hey, we're going to do something with this. But you've also got new players at the table, right? Like World Whiskey Society. And this is their Wyatt Earp American single malt, their small batch. This is a fantastic display of what an American single malt can be, and in my opinion, should be. I'm not a super large fan of that like overly malty characteristic, like I want more to it, or if it is going to be malty, like I need it to be like a sweeter malt or like a fruit complement or a fruit component to it. But anyways, as far as what the legal definition is, because I mean that's really what we're looking for here. There's some parameters that have been laid out. So, first couple things, has to be aged in an oak barrel. That's it. Oak barrel. That's all it says. Does not have to be white oak. Does not have to be new uncharred oak like bourbon. Just an oak barrel. Okay. It has to be bottled at a minimum of 80 proof. That lines up with the legal definition of whiskey in this country. Anything below 80 proof is not legally a whiskey. It could be a whiskey liqueur or a liqueur with flavoring added or something, but to be a whiskey in this country, it has to be bottled at least 80 proof. This falls right in line with that because this is going to be a subcategory, obviously. It cannot be distilled any higher than 160 proof. That lines up with bourbon and other whiskeys in this country. You can't distill it any higher than 160 proof, and it has to be no higher than 125 proof when it hits the barrel. So you can go ahead and distill it to 160, but you're going to have to cut it with water so that your barrel entry proof is 125 or lower. That's it. Okay? Easy enough. One kind of unique bugaboo about American Single Malt that I'm not super thrilled with, but I understand it. Was it E95 or NE95, whatever it's called? Caramel coloring is allowed to be added, and that's for color and consistency. Now, if it is added, it has to be listed on the bottle. Period. No exceptions. If you're adding coloring as a producer of American Single Malts, you got to disclose it, which I think in transparency's sake is just, good. You don't want people drinking stuff they don't know what's in it. You're going to be adding things. And I know that it's mostly harmless or it is harmless. Either way, though, I want to know if there's coloring added to my whiskey. If you're putting out bottles that are slightly different in color, I mean, I personally don't care. I think that's actually kind of cool because I think that you're taking your product, like the very base of what it is that you're making, and you're putting it straight in a bottle. You're not trying to make it look commercialized. That's something that I would look for, but I digress. The oak container that it's aged in can be no larger than 700 liters, which is like massive. 700 liters is huge. So, I mean, yeah, they can't put it in like literal gigantic wooden vats to age. Like that's no. I would be willing to guess that most producers are going to continue using the standard 15, 32, or 53 gallon barrels, just like they have been, because that's what we have the most of in this country, right? We have a lot of ex-bourbon casks that are kind of floating around right now. And the beautiful thing about this is they don't just get used once. You could technically use a barrel 5, 6, 8, 10 times. I don't know, however long until the barrel falls apart, because it doesn't have to be new and uncharred. Now, whether or not this is going to have an accidental side effect of driving up prices on Scotch and Irish whiskey, who primarily age their spirits in used bourbon casks because we've had so many hitting the market over the last however many decades, who knows? If so, sorry guys. Not intended, but I could see that happening. There's also two primary types. So you have your American Single Malt whiskeys, which is just, that's it. It's an American Single Malt whiskey. Could be 6 months old, could be 6 years old, whatever. But then there's also straight American Single Malt whiskeys, which means it is aged for at least a minimum of 2 years. Just like bourbon, just like other American whiskeys, that word straight in the title implies at least 2 years. If it is less than 2 years, it has to be stated somewhere on the bottle how old it is. Okay. Now, in more traditional single malt, and by more traditional, understand I'm saying Scotch specifically, because Scotch or Scotland, those distillers over on the other side of the pond, they really kind of started the whole single malt thing, right? So theirs is 100% malted barley, right? Our definition is a little bit different. It's got to be at least 51% malted barley. So the lion's share of the grain that goes into this bottle has to be 51% malted barley. The rest could be corn, rye, wheat, sorghum, oats, whatever you want. but at least 51% of that has to be malted barley. That's how we're going to differentiate ourselves from the Scotch. So for all those people that, for years, the kind of stigma was, oh yeah, you're just making Scotch, but you're aging it over here, which that in itself is a huge difference. Scotland's climate shift and temperatures, and I mean, even their elevation to sea level, it's all different, right? And Scotland's a very small island nation that is surrounded by water on all sides. Whereas, I mean, like, think of Kentucky, okay? I mean, the temperature shifts, the changes in elevation, the access to sea air. I mean, that's all going to be vastly different. So you're going to come out with a way different product. This here is actually one of my favorite American single malts, and it is nothing at all like a Scotch I've ever had. And this is aged in an Oloroso sherry cask. And that's one of the primary aging casks that a lot of Scotch whiskeys use, is either sherry or they'll use ex-bourbon. Obviously sometimes there's port barrels or other wine barrels, but the biggest ones in my experience are either sherry casks or your ex-bourbon casks. Okay. Let's see. All of this is going to be overseen by the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission, or the ASMWC. And I believe they are the ones that have kind of been at the forefront of this, kind of meeting with the TTB and helping to file the petitions. I think the first real petitions that were started were like back in 2017. I think like Westland was one of the big names that was really pushing for an official designation, because Westland's been putting out some amazing single malts these last few years here, and they're finally going to start getting some of the recognition that they deserve, because there's actually a class for this now. If I walk into a liquor store in 6 months and there's a shelf that's actually dedicated to American single malt whiskeys, I'll actually be really excited. I know Jim Beam got on board. They were ahead of the curve with their Claremont Steep, and I believe that is 100% malted barley, which is absolutely an option. Not all of these are going to be 100% barley, but what are you going to do? But this change, this happening, this is a big deal, right? It was necessary because we needed this classification, because barrels were becoming scarcer and scarcer. And honestly, it's kind of the next step in growing the whiskey market in this country, because people are always looking for something new, something different. With bourbon, you can only go so far. There's so many rules around bourbon. We've already kind of been pushing those envelopes with a lot of the cask finishing and whatnot. And honestly, this is necessary. This titling and this official ruling was necessary to help grow public trust in the classification. Because before, I mean, you could throw American single malt whiskey on there, and I mean, yeah, maybe it's a single malt, maybe it's not. I mean, maybe it's light whiskey, and it was just labeled to be more attractive. But now, legally, there's something to prop it up. There's something behind it. And I think that's really cool. I think a lot of bourbon drinkers are going to be super excited about this change, just because it brings more credibility to the marketplace. It brings more credibility to some of these bottles that have been sitting on the shelf. And I think it's going to help foster more innovation and more uniqueness and different things coming out of maybe some of the legacy distillers, some of the big boys that have the money and the capability to do really cool, unique things. And maybe it's not an American single malt necessarily. Maybe it's stuff like, Red Cedar makes Oatlander. It's one of my favorite American whiskeys because it's made with a non-traditional grain. And I love that. I hope more people start doing things like that. Motor City Gas, that is another one by me, making things out of sorghum or oats or whatever other kinds of, mezcal finishing. They're peat smoking some of their bourbon. They're peat smoking their wheat whiskeys. Just non-traditional things that aren't necessarily done in America, but are more traditionally accepted outside of this country, is now going to become part of, I think, our whiskey community as a whole. So super excited for those things. I hope everybody else is too. And maybe, next time you see an American single malt sitting on the shelf, you don't just, oh, well, that's probably piss water in a bottle. Like, no, maybe give it a shot, grab the label, see what it's all about. Look at the proof. For me, I personally plan on applying the same 3 rules to an American single malt as I would to a Scotch, right? And that is it 46% or better? Okay. Is it non-chill filtered? And is there no artificial coloring? Even though it is allowable, I likely will not buy an American single malt if they've got E95 or caramel coloring added to it. I'm just not going to do that unless I have heard or tried it myself, or somebody told me like, hey, you really have to have this. It's freaking amazing. Something along those lines. Then maybe, yeah, I'll try it if there's coloring added. Like I do have several bottles of Dalmore Scotch on the shelf there, and they are very transparent about the fact that they add caramel coloring for batch consistency. And that is what it is. I mean, there's no getting away from it on the Scotch end of things. But for American Single Malt, I think that transparency is really good. I don't pretend to be an expert on this. This is the information that I was able to kind of throw together for this video. I haven't had a chance to read all 40 pages of this release. Obviously, running into Christmas, had a lot of family obligations and events and work stuff, and Christmas is in a few days. So this is kind of the broad strokes overview of the stuff that I thought would be most interesting and most pertinent to the conversation. If you guys want to pull that document up, it is going to be, actually it is available on the TTB website. Have at it. It's a lot of legal jargon. I know I've been looking through the PDF over the last few days, and it's a lot of information. And I mean, in terms of what the actual classification is, I think it's really only 2 or 3 paragraphs. The rest is reference material going all the way back to 2017 when those initial petitions were filed, and then the additional petitions which were filed in like 2018, 2020. I mean, there's a lot of information in there leading up to the establishment of this class. So if you guys are still awake, if my droning hasn't put you to sleep, I appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in and checking the video out. I appreciate my viewers, I really do. This video should be dropping the day before Christmas Eve, so Merry Christmas to all of you out there. I hope you have a very safe and happy holiday. As always, please smash that subscribe button, drop me a like, drop a comment down below, and hopefully I will see you next time. Cheers.